I mean, almost like clockwork, within a few days of Pluto moving into Aquarius, the announcement was made that Elon Musk's company has successfully implanted a microchip into someone's brain that allows them to communicate with an external device so that they're able to give it commands, a paralyzed person. When we see the unknown and we see the potential of the shadow of what some people call post-humanism or transhumanism, or this artificial intelligence AI or augmented reality AR, or all these things that are going to make humans no longer humans as we know them. Well, I got some news for you. Technology without wisdom, technology is not science. Technology by itself is the shadow side of Aquarius and or even Pluto in Aquarius. As Pluto moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, we are on the precipice between the past and the future. And you might say, well, aren't we always? And the answer is yes, we always are on that precipice between the past and the future, but the precipice has never been so great.
In this captivating episode, renowned astrologer Rick Levine invites us on a mind expanding journey through the cosmos, exploring the profound implications of Pluto's transition into Aquarius. With his signature blend of wisdom, wit, and cosmic perspective, Levine delves into the transformative potential of this astrological event, encouraging us to embrace the unknown and expand our awareness. Levine emphasizes the power of language and mindset, reminding us that our words and beliefs shape our reality. He encourages listeners to adopt a youthful, playful spirit, recognizing that age is merely a state of mind. As Pluto moves into Aquarius, Levine suggests we stand on the brink of a new era, one that demands inner work, self-awareness, and the willingness to let go of outdated beliefs and structures. It's now time to tune into this one very inspirational human being. Enjoy. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what side of the globe you are sitting at this very moment. We have another amazing guest for you. We have Rick Levine. Welcome to the show.
It's wonderful to be here, and I hate to start off correcting a host or hostess, but if it's a globe, how can it have a side?
True, right? I love that. Yes,
Language is so important.
it is. It is. Words do have
But
power.
the thing about the globe is significant because at any given moment in time, about a third of humanity is holding the dream space. Interesting way of looking at it.
Amazing. It's funny, we've had this conversation and everyone has their own understanding or perception of what is the world. And I always just look at it as a vortex. I just look at it as energy.
Yeah.
But everyone has their own, their own belief system. And who knows? I'll never know because I'll
Yeah.
never get there, right? I never get to see it. And I'm a visual person, so I need to see it. So, Rick, the way that we love to start the show is we always love to ask our guests to tell us what inspired you to do what you do today.
Ooh, well, I don't know if any one thing inspired me, but I would say that being open to the trajectory is something that has been continuous in my life. And when I say open to the trajectory, I mean never really knowing for sure where I was going to end up, but living my life basically following, um, as is written in the Celestine prophecy, following the brighter colors, going where my curiosity led me, asking questions. Even as a youth, I found myself reading all the books that I wasn't supposed to read. If someone told me, no, don't read that, that's where I would go because I knew that the mystery was what was important. And in college, I was lucky enough to have a philosophy teacher who taught the search creates the reality. And when you stop searching, you stop creating reality. I mean, it's been said that when you get old, you stop playing. And I think it's exactly the opposite. When you stop playing, when you stop searching, then you get old.
Oh, I love that. I love that because I always think that age is a state of mind. I think quite often I hear people say, "Oh, I'm getting old," and carry on, and yet I'm older than them. And I would never consider myself old. I would never even use that word. It goes back to what you were saying. Those words are really important because they, even though they're words, they actually form a picture in your mind. And then once you can see it, it creates a reality. It's like your body
Yeah.
will go, well, I'm hearing you call yourself old. I'll give you the evidence. I'll give you a sore back. I'll give you a sore knee. What are your
Well,
thoughts?
when I look in the mirror, I just look at who is that person? Because I mean, I feel like a teenager, and I'll be 75 in a few weeks. And it's like, I find myself at parties and gatherings where I'm older by 30 or 40 years than the next oldest person there. I just, like, yeah, aging is a state of mind.
100%, 100%. I'm 57 and I still feel like I'm 20. So for
Yeah.
me, I keep very active and very, I think I've got a child mindset, as in I like to have fun. And I think that's really
Yeah.
important. When you
Yeah.
stop
Yeah.
having
Play.
fun, you stop living.
That's right. When you stop playing, you get old.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get
Mm.
into some astrology. So the way
Sure.
that I'd love to start is I know there's lots of transits happening in February. I mean, we can talk about those. There's like the conjunction with Pluto conjunct Mercury, Venus, Mars. Maybe let's start with Pluto in Aquarius, just to get a bit of an overview, and then we'll dive into a little bit deeper and go wherever you want to go with this.
Sure.
But what kind of preview are we about to experience over the next 20 years with that
Well,
transit?
let me say definitively, anyone who says that they know doesn't, because uh, of two things. Number one, the last time Pluto was moving through Aquarius was back in the late 1700s. Number two is that, which means that no one alive has experienced that before. We can read things in history books. But number two is that things were so different then, and all the planets were in different places except for Pluto, which is back where it was. Um, it's been said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. There are similar, pieces to the threads, and we can begin to isolate what might be occurring by talking about what we think we know about Pluto. And I say what we think we know because we haven't even known Pluto for 100 years. I mean, and Pluto, just by its archetype, really defies knowing, because Pluto is really everything that we don't know. I mean, there are other things that we don't know, but Pluto's archetype is that which is hidden. Pluto has been called historically, Pluto has been called the Lord of the underworld. But remember, Pluto is simply Latin for Hades, which is Greek for hell. And here I find it very important to do what I like to call my brief Christian disclaimer. Now, I'm not disclaiming Christianity. I'm simply disclaiming their right to define what hell is, because the image and understanding of hell has been around for thousands of years longer than Christianity. And Christianity has focused on one narrow little slit of the hell realms, which is basically about getting punished, about suffering the consequences, for sin. I mean, this is the Christian take on hell, whereas William Blake, the great English mystic poet, wrote that hell is a place so beautiful it would torment an angel to insanity. you know, Hell is everything that is not on the surface. Traditionally, hell being the underground and hell being also the place of riches is really interesting because the word plutocracy is a government by the ultra wealthy, but they're so wealthy that their money is hidden. Now, here's the fascinating thing, because when you go back a few thousand years, one could have property, one could have money, but the ultra wealthy owned what was hidden underground. They owned gold, copper, silver, diamonds. These things were all hidden. Now, it took entering the 20th century for Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and the generation of psychonauts, if you want to call them that, to make the understanding of what we now call the unconscious. And the word unconscious has not been around much longer than our understanding and observation of Pluto. It was really only the turn of the 20th century when the word unconscious became, a word that was used, and it was created for that purpose by Freud to describe everything that goes on in our mind that's beneath the surface. Pluto is the unconscious, period. And when someone says, "Oh, I do that unconsciously all the time," or "Yeah, I'm aware of that, it's unconscious." No, you can't be aware of what's unconscious. If it's unconscious, you don't know you're doing it. Period. And so the first thing we really need to know about Pluto is that it's everything that's hidden. It is our unconscious. And yet, if there's one and only one thing that we can change, and I know this goes into what you do as a coach, the only thing that we can change, Buddhists remind us, is our awareness. Period. That's it. There's nothing else that can be changed. Everything else that changes is a function of our ability to make different choices based upon our widened perspective. And so here's where the magic of Pluto comes in, because Pluto by itself is hidden. But when the light of the sun, or the light of a candle, or the light of the intellect of Mercury, or the light of consciousness shines in the darkness, then it's no longer Pluto, it's brought into awareness. And in fact, this whole thing of Pluto not being a planet, Pluto loves it. There was an author who had best-selling novels back in the not novels, but books in the 1920s. He had 2 books on the New York Times bestseller list, and his name was Charles Fort. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but there is still a Fortean society. And in Charles Fort's 2 most famous books were what the first book that really hit it for him was called The Book of the Damned. And his second book was Lo, like the religious, like lo and behold. And Charles Fort wrote about things that were impossible. And his opening line to The Book of the Damned was this: "By the damned, I mean the excluded." You see, when something is excluded, Plutonic, it has incredible power. But what we do in therapy, what we do in healing, what we do in any sort of coaching type work, what we're doing is we're helping people to see what they didn't see before, which makes Pluto not as powerful, because what was frightening and overwhelming and created anxiety and fear, once you see it, even if it's horrific, is never as bad as it was that the mind can make it when it doesn't know what's going on. And so, in order to talk about Pluto and Aquarius or Pluto and anything, we have to understand that the nature of Pluto is is hidden, and it's the fear that we have of moving into these uncertain and hidden realms, and yet when something becomes known, then that becomes the shadow work, the work that we need to do in order to integrate that. You know, when all of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, were discovered one at a time, each of them, when they were discovered, astrologers were sure that each and every one of them was the most horrific and worst thing ever. Uranus was cataclysm, Neptune was delusion and psychosis, and Pluto was mass fascism and the subterfuge of being dominated. It was death. And yet it turned out that as we began to integrate these energies, what we thought was catastrophe was actually genius breakthrough. Uranus and Neptune isn't just delusion and psychosis, it's the creative imagination. And now we get to Pluto, because Pluto is not just death, it is the process of death and rebirth, of bringing what was hidden back into the light. I love the William Blake line. William Blake, I wanted as his epitaph on his gravestone, he wanted William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. Because Pluto is about that moment of when we have to let go of what we thought was true in order to move into some realm that allows us then to expand our consciousness. The Buddhist teacher Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche once quipped, and I think this is one of the best quotes ever, and if you haven't figured this out already, I'm a total quoteaholic. If someone else said it better than I can, I'm going to use it. But Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche wrote or said, he said, enlightenment is the ego's greatest disappointment, because the ego's job is survival. Without an ego, we wouldn't eat, we wouldn't sleep, we wouldn't have shelter. The ego's job is to create the illusion that Rick Levine is separate from everything else, that Catherine is separate from everything else. And the ego's job is to make sure that enough separateness or boundary is created that I, Rick Levine, or you, Catherine, can persist in being Catherine, or me in being Rick. And yet, when we become more enlightened or have inklings of that, we realize that I don't end at my skin. I don't even end here. In fact, I don't end. In fact, the illusion is that I am separate from you. And of course, that always reminds me of the Beatles song, I am you as you are me, as we are all together, goo goo gajoob. The fact of the matter is that when we fall in love, or when we fall into any state of awareness or enlightenment, the ego dissolves, because we can't take it with us. It's like the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. And I think you referenced in one of your, or someone in one of your emails, the image that you can't teach the caterpillar how to be a butterfly or how to fly, but the awareness is what changes. And the magical thing is that if the caterpillar had an ego, there's no way in hell, double entendre absolutely intended, there's no way in hell it would ever get into the cocoon, because the caterpillar's got to go in order for it to be transformed. And so now we come full circle to Pluto, which has for the last 15 years or so been in Capricorn. And Pluto's job is to kill, is to destructure, is to deconstruct, is to create upheaval enough so that those things which seem to be the most important disintegrate and fall to the bottom. This is Nietzsche's concept of nihilism. And Pluto is the ultimate nihilistic planet. And while Pluto was in Capricorn, what did it deconstruct? It deconstructed those things that we thought were the most undeconstructible, those things which were the most real. In my country, we've deconstructed the Constitution, the foundation of the United States. But government and banks and roads and buildings and all these foundations, politics, even as it stands everywhere, has basically Pluto has basically taken the wind out of its sails and forced it to the bottom. It's like God is dead, but no, it's just Pluto in Capricorn made all those Capricornian hierarchical things like corporatism, like colonialism, kind of be deconstructed. And so now, as Pluto has moved into Aquarius, and we're really still in this middle ground because it touched into Aquarius for a few months last year, 2023, March, April, May. And then it moved back into Capricorn to kind of do some more remedial studying to clean up whatever it didn't do yet. And now it's back in Aquarius, but it'll move back into a Capricorn for a couple of months at the end of this year before really moving into Aquarius. And as Capricorn has to do with the structure of things that are, Aquarius has to do with the conception of how things could be if we understood how they all fit together. So as Capricorn has to do with the past and with the status quo, Pluto has to do with the future. I'm sorry, Aquarius has to do with the future. Aquarius has to do with technology. In traditional astrology, Saturn is the planet that rules or is connected to both Capricorn and Aquarius. And we moderners have taken Uranus, the quantum planet, the planet of the future, and replaced Saturn with its rulership of Aquarius. But the fact of the matter is that until we discovered Uranus in the late 1700s, around the time that Pluto went into Aquarius, Saturn did double duty because Saturn had to do with the laws. It's not just a good idea. Gravity is the law. Boom, there are real laws. Okay. But a scientist is someone who can know the laws well enough that can know where they can be bent, where they can be broken, where they can be tweaked to make a breakthrough. And that's why Aquarius has to do with the future, but it's still structure Saturn. But now in comes Uranus, which is the sudden change, the lightning striking, and so as Pluto moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, we are on the precipice between the past and the future. And you might say, well, aren't we always? And the answer is yes, we always are on that precipice between the past and the future, but the precipice has never been so great.
I love the way that you explained that. And I love the fact that you said nobody knows, because I can't tell you how often I hear, oh my gosh, did you hear about this and that? Because, they're following a particular astrologist and it's doom and
Yeah.
gloom. And I really believe, and I love the way that you described it, because it is an archetype, right? It is with every archetype, and it's what you and I were talking about before we came on the show, was a dichotomy. There is a light and a shadow to every archetype. And it goes back to what you were saying, even in what we do from a coaching perspective, we do work with the unconscious. So the way that I always tell people, the behavior is not the person. The behavior is how they're showing up. And they're not consciously aware of how they're showing up. It's what they think.
To the extent of like 70, 80, 90% of how we show up is, in fact, unconscious.
Yes. So, and it's about going in there. And I think also it's like, I love the fact that you talk about bringing awareness to it, because that's what we do, is shine light into the shadows at the shadow.
It's all we can do.
Yeah. But
in fact, when people say, well, can astrology change your future? My answer is no. It can change your past, which is what therapy does. Therapy doesn't change your future. It helps you recreate how you got to this moment by visioning and reanalyzing and reviewing your past. And by doing that, it creates a present where there's more options, more choices than there were when you didn't have a full view of the past, which then allows the trajectory to be altered. But we don't change the future, we change the past. People go, you can't say change the past, it's said and done. And I go, oh yeah, well, what'd you think about Santa Claus when you were 4 years old? Or what'd you think about the Europeans discovering the United States or Australia? No, that wasn't what happened. But we recreate our past as we get wider perspective, and therefore that then changes our potential of the choices that we make in the present moment. That's all we can do.
I like the
And
way
I tell
that.
my students, if there are plenty of amazing teachers out there, and I have students, I have an apprentice program, I've had students who've been working with me for a long time, and I tell every student of mine, when you get the urge, go. There's too many good teachers out there to be stuck with me forever. But if you find a teacher that has all the answers, get the hell out of there,
Oh, I like that.
because they don't, because no one does. And if
Yeah.
anyone has all the answers, it's a sure sign that their ego is out of control, because it's the ego that thinks it knows all.
It's true, and we even say that too. It's a discovery. We talk about any collaboration is a discovery. No one knows everything because what is everything? What is everything? What is all? And so I even like the fact that you talked about, and I want to maybe unpack this a little bit with the archetype when you were talking about any archetype, whether it's Uranus, whether it's Saturn, whether it's Pluto.
Sure.
Because when we talk about working with the unconscious mind, which is the shadow aspects, obviously, when we don't allow, let's say Pluto, if we don't allow that archetype to express itself, to be seen, heard, and valued, I guess the projection of that archetype will be like obsessive control, destruction, that the shadow aspect, compared to allowing yourself to dance with it, bring light to it. Then it's in its light aspect, which is transformation, power, insight. So how do we, because I agree, that's the influence. We're talking about Pluto in Aquarius, that's the influence, that's the forecast. But then it's what we do with it. Is that right? It's how we dance with that archetype?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that anyone who makes concrete predictions about a presidential election here in the United States, or about what's going to be happening in the next 5 or 10 years, what they're projecting is basically a result of their unprocessed uncertainties, fears, attractions, desires, horrors, old tapes that are being replayed. People uh, don't understand, even people who have studied it still largely don't understand the role of, and you use this word, the role of projection, because there's basically two things that occur when a planet or an energy or a dynamic or an archetype doesn't get to be seen or doesn't get to be expressed. There's two possibilities that occur that have to do with its lack of expression. One of them, and these two different dynamics are incredibly different, and yet the result is the same. The result is projection. The two dynamics are repression and suppression. And people use those two words interchangeably all the time, and they're simply not the same. Because if you know you're doing it, you're suppressing it. If you go, oh, yeah, I repress that all the time, you're not repressing it, you're suppressing it because you know you're doing it. You can't be aware of repression because, by definition, it's unconscious. Now, regardless of whether some facet of some archetype that's in your chart or in your character, whether it's astrological or not, and I'm not of the belief that astrology is the only map. It's happens to be a good map. But regardless of whether I know I'm doing it or not, whether I'm repressing it or suppressing it, the fact is that anything that does not naturally express gets out there somehow. And when I see it out there, I don't think it has anything to do with me. It might be some facet of myself I don't like. I had a client a number of years ago who was married for like 14, 15 years. And one day her husband left her a note on the refrigerator saying, I'm out of here. It's been grand, but I can't deal with you anymore. I'm goodbye. And this woman had an astrological configuration of Uranus, the planet of sudden change, of unexpected events that release tension, opposite the sun in her chart. So there was this tug of war. Okay. About 4 years, and I had her as a client. We talked about this whole thing and about this whole Uranus, aspect of her life. About 4 years later, she came back to me and said, I can't believe it, but it happened again. I was in a really good relationship. It was 3 years. And I swear to God, it was the exact same dynamic. The person left me a note and was out of here. It was like a shock and a surprise. Now, what I told this woman was that until she figured out how to be as weird and as eccentric and as non-conforming as the people that she attracts, she's going to still and always attract people that are going to bail on her because it's really her that wanted to bail. So the point here is that when we become more aware of those things that are invisible or things that we know that we're doing because we don't like the fact that I'm really erratic and I can't make commitments, and therefore, I put it on other people. I find myself attracted to them, but I hate it in me, but it's okay in them because it's not me. I can blame them then. But until we become more aware of it, and as you said, Catherine, until we're able to dance with it and to engage it as an aspect of ourselves, it'll always be a plague. And of course, this is the problem of what's going on out there in the world. And now I've just shifted into out there in the world is really a projection of not only my projection, but your projection and everyone else's in the world. The last book that he wrote, the last book that Carl Jung wrote was a book called The Undiscovered Self. Undiscovered Self, we're talking Pluto, the unconscious. And in it, he said that no amount of politics or treaties will ever create world peace. The only way that world peace will be attained is that when the individuals living in the world have peace within their minds and have integrated the unconscious or the unknown or the shadow. And that's really the work. That's why you do what you do. That's why I do what I do. And it's not like we're perfect. You and I, everyone has our shadow. That's where, and it's like an onion. It doesn't matter how fast you peel the onion, the inside, the shadow is always recreating and creating. When someone says, oh yeah, I went to therapy, I dealt with that, I go, oh yeah, uh-huh. There's no such thing as, of being enlightened. It's not a past tense thing. It has to happen in every moment. The Buddhists call this the razor's edge, where there is no remembrance of the past and no anticipation of the future. Be here now sounded easy when Ram Dass said it, but it's not easy because it requires absolute razor-like focus of making sure that we're clear about what's in the past, what's bubbling up, what feels familiar, whether we're aware of it or not, and what that does to our anticipation or expectations of what might be in the future.
Oh, you're so speaking my language right now. I'm like, I've got goosebumps over goosebumps or god bumps over god bumps. But what you're saying resonates with me for many reasons. One,
Goosebumps are amongst my favorite things.
Okay.
Goosebumps and tears.
And
Both
me
good.
too. Me too. I love tears too.
And so I think that what you're saying is, I think we're never done. People say to me, "Oh, Catherine, you've been doing this for 30 years. You must be." And I went, "You've got to be kidding. We teach what we must learn. I've got so much more work to do because I'm still teaching it." But I also love the fact that you were talking, I talk about this all the time. Like, if you're not happy with your relationship, if you're not happy with your career, work, finance, whatever that may be, it's external. That is a reflection of your internal world. Your external world is always a reflection of your internal world. So no matter what is taking place, even astrologically, I always believe it's the meaning we give it. And it goes back to kind of my belief system in readings. I mean, I've had some readings myself. Some amazing astrologists do my readings, and I love them. But once again, it's what you're saying. If we're not clear or aware of our projections or the work that we need to do, we're constantly projecting, or depending on the lens we have, right? We're constantly projecting our belief system, our fears, our whatever, into, whether it's reading tarot, whether it's reading a map. Like I said, there's many maps. So I love that. So then how do you do it? Like for me, the way and that's how I guess Amanda and I've connected, and because I love astrology. I'm not an astrologist, although I've been dancing with astrology since my 20s. But I love the fact that you can ask questions to draw out the information from the individual to see if they are dancing with that archetype, whether they're connecting with that, the light or the shadow of that archetype. So how does one draw that out from the individual? How do you do it?
Well, let me see. Do I have a recipe that I'm looking up on my bookshelf for my book of recipes? Nope, doesn't exist.
I love that. I love it.
That you're asking the $1 million question. I think there's many tools and techniques that one can employ, but anyone who's worked in this area knows that the tools and techniques are, I won't say always, but nearly always secondary to the practitioner. That you can have an amazing healer, an amazing advisor, someone who's really helping people, who's using some shit stupid practice because they're amazing, you know? And you can also have someone who's using the most amazing set of tools that is an absolute crap helper, advisor, and just goes through life, annoying people and unhelping them. What's the opposite of helping? Of not helping them at all. And so, I think that one piece of the puzzle, coming back to awareness, is that you can't help someone else become more aware unless you are in a life where you are becoming more aware. It doesn't mean it's not a path where you're here and then you look back and go, that person's there and that person's there, and that person's ahead. It's not a line. It's not, Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche wrote a book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, and it wasn't about buying things. It was about this incorrect notion of thinking that there is some place on the path where we need to be, and there's other people behind us and then other people ahead of us. And so, and I think this notion of just simply being present with someone is part of it. Now, obviously, you can't do that unless you have some experience in being present with yourself through whatever tools that may be, whether it may be some religious or spiritual practice, or some divinatory practice, or some teacher who has some methodology of being able to separate, the proverbial wheat from the chaff, whatever it is. There's so many different ways to get there. I love Matthew Fox, who was a priest, a Catholic priest in San Francisco. And Matthew Fox used to be, he's elderly. He's still around. I don't know. But many years ago, I I heard him speak a couple times, and he was so proud of the fact that he had something on his resume that most people don't have, and that was he was personally fired by the Pope. As a priest, he was conducting all-night raves in the basement of a church in San Francisco that were drug-free raves to keep the kids off the streets. And he was told by first the bishop and then eventually the Pope that this is not okay and that he had to stop doing it, and he refused. Matthew Fox said, "It doesn't matter where you dig the well, you get to the same water." So, how do we attack this, or how do we approach this? There are so many different approaches. But the larger change that we're dealing with culturally, socially, societally, I think is the better word than socially, is a change that has to do with a gender equilibrialization. I don't know if that's a right word. Finding equanimity between gender approach, because the right hand, the hand of doing, the left brain, right hand, the patriarchal approach is basically a top-down approach, and that is, you're not practicing this religion, here's the religion to practice, and now you're a better person, and now you have a path and you have a place in life, and you'll end up in heaven rather than going to hell. And this whole idea of a dominant directive control way of helping someone, which has historically been the way that someone would help you, whether it was a doctor. You go to the doctor and the doctor says, don't do this, do that, and has all the answers. Most of us now know that doctors don't have all the answers. They have a perspective, but the only real way to heal something is for you to do the work yourself, even though a right doctor or right doctors can be absolutely magical on your path. So back to what we can do is this idea of not coming in with the answers. I have your answer. Instead, coming in with we're all in this together. You're a human, I'm a human. We're all screwed up. We all have Chiron, which is some original wound that we're going to take to our grave, But the fact of the matter is that if I can listen to you, and if I can give you feedback based upon whatever the tools and technologies and learning that I've had that can in some way resonate with you, that allows you to begin to retell your own story, then I can be of help. And I think we have to be careful, you and I, because we are I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say that your place and my place in the realm of humans, and this is not a better than or worse than, but it is something that some Buddhists call this precious life. We're born, reborn. There's billions of us on the planet, but some of us have an opportunity to actually stand back and think about the things that you and I think about, and to do the shadow work. Ram Dass used to say, that God comes to the homeless in the form of food, or the hungry in the form of food, or that if you have a 2,000-pound rock on your foot, you're not going to be able to sit in a yoga posture and meditate or think about what you're going to tell your boss at an interview 2 days from now. You want to get the fucking rock off your foot. And so we have an opportunity, because many people go through their entire life never having an inkling of there's something more than getting that damn rock off their foot. And so, it's, I think, important for us to remind ourselves that we don't get to just go through this world fixing people and giving them the answers, because that doesn't work. It didn't work with 2,000 years of people telling people about Jesus. It didn't work with 1,500 years of people telling people about Muhammad or Buddha or Moses or whatever. There's a lot of wise people out there, people who have highly realized their potentials, but it's never going to work by saying, like my parents did, do as I tell you to do, don't do as I say, don't do as I do. And that's just completely backwards. No one does as they're told. We do, as we see.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything. That there's so much I need to say right now. I'm like, it's all bubbling up. So I in our school, we and I talk about this all the time. No one is broken, so we're not here to fix anyone, because the moment you think someone is broken, or we're here to fix, we're projecting they're broken. And so some of the things that the questions that might come out of us is that we think they are wounded. So we need to look at individuals as they have the resources they need. I mean, we are the problem and we are the solution. We are the wound and we are the gift. And so we understand that there's that dichotomy, and it's allowing, I think that for my experience, anyway, I can only talk my experience. I never tell someone what to do. I will ask them to contemplate. And I believe that, Rick, because everyone's so busy, so external focused, that when they're given that space to be seen, heard, and valued, that's when they get the insight. That's that breakthrough that you were talking about before. The insight is because they're actually giving themselves some space to think and contemplate. And by asking the right questions. So even for me, like, because I could read, and I'm sure every person, if they look at a chart, they can read so much out of a chart. But for me, I could potentially not know, because I always say, I don't know. I'm here to learn. But asking the right questions, I will learn from you. And so I think that what we do is very similar in that way. We don't try to fix or tell people how to go and live their life. We understand that we're all here on a journey that we've all signed up for.
For years, maybe even decades, when I've got phone calls back in the day, don't have phone calls as much as now. I get emails or direct message DMs or whatever. But people saying, you're an astrologer, I have a question, I need to know, blah 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 blah. Should I met someone, is this my soulmate? Mercury just went retrograde, should I buy this house? Is this a good time? Blah 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 blah. And I have a stock answer that I tell these people who come to me with a question, and that is, I think the universe has played a cruel trick on you, or you've misdialed, or you've sent your email to the wrong person, because it sounds to me like you're looking for the answer astrologer, and by accident you've got the question astrologer. I will not ever answer a question for you as a paying client. In fact, I would not even do that. I especially wouldn't do that for someone I love. And here's the reason why. I am particularly good at answering questions. It's a knack that I've had my whole life, even before I knew anything. Before I knew anything, I'd make shit up and people would go, wow, you're really good at answering questions. So here's the problem. If you're asking a question and I look at your chart and do all the mechanics and do all the analysis and give you an answer, you don't have the answer to your question. You don't have your answer to the question. You have my answer. And my answers are good. And what that does is that stops your process, which is a karma that I'm not interested in assuming, because when you stop someone else's process, it's a form of murder. I mean, obviously it's not on the same level as a physical, hurting someone or murdering someone, but we are all the victims of this sort of murder, from our religious institutions, from our schools, from our parents, from our friends, from our siblings, because every time someone shuts us down, that in some way, stops us from being what we could possibly be. But the greatest thing, I think that shuts us down, is this running into someone who has the illusion that they have your answer. Because when you stop searching, you stop creating reality. And when you stop creating reality, you're no longer living your life. you've become a doctor because your parents expected, or you're taking out the trash every day at 6 o'clock because you think you have to, or whatever it is, rather than doing it because you know that that would be a good thing to do. So that's a little bit of my pet peeve about going to anyone and getting an answer. And that's, it's different if someone says, okay, so what happened, when Pluto moved into Aquarius, 250 years ago? Even then, I'm going to give you an answer based upon my perspective. I'm an American. I'm going to tell you, well, that was the formation of the United States of America and the French Revolution. And this was the first time in human history where there was attempts to make governments that were ruled by the people rather than by some chosen family or religious leader. That seems to be important. But even there, I'm picking something from history that I think is what I know about that point, which is what we've recorded. And there may be more to the story than that, as we are learning, as we reframe the whole idea of Western colonialism, or colonialism in general. That sure, we might not be where we are had not the Europeans taken over the world for a while. um, but the world was doing fine without them.
So true. And I love the fact, the way that because you answer it depending on your map of your world, your reality, right? And I say that when people come and ask me questions, Catherine, how do we do this? I'm like, how would you do if you were me? I always put it
Yeah.
back on that. Well, I don't know. That's why I've come and asked you. But if you did know, what would you do? And they go, I don't know. And I said, maybe you need to sleep on it, think about it. And then what happens is they always come back a day or 2 days later and
Well,
go,
and the
what?
problem is compounded by how many beliefs that we have created in our reality tunnel based upon our cultural, social, religious, family, and even our individual stuff. Uh, People astrologically say, okay, so we just recently had Mars trining Uranus. And all the astrologers were writing, this is an awesome thing because now energy gets to express, things can happen, sudden things can happen, but you can actually make change. That's fine. But what if I'm a human being that has a life that I love and everything's fine, and the thought of change scares the crap out of me? I'm projecting my perception of what something is or could be or should be onto you, and I know nothing about you or where you're coming from, or who you are. And this is true even with Pluto moving into Aquarius. I mean, I can't tell you how tired I am. I mean, first of all, people mixing up the idea of Pluto moving into Aquarius and the age of Aquarius, which is probably a good century away still. I mean, that's arguable, but it's much more likely that the age of Aquarius is probably still 120, 30, 40 years away. Regardless, people are going, Aquarius, where everyone's going to have rights. We're all going to be equal. There's going to be this sense of collective, of humanity rather than the individuals in it, blah, 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 blah. And I have a one-word answer to that, and it only works if you know Star Trek. And that one-word answer is Borg. I don't know if you know, Borg is like the insectoid
Yes.
intelligent being that when you meet someone who is Borg, they don't say, my name is, they don't go, I am, they say, we are Borg. We shall assimilate you. Resistance is futile. Termites are an amazing Aquarian society that is brilliantly intelligent. Bees are Aquarian societies, ant colonies. And that's great. They have their functionality. But that's the shadow side, or one of the many shadow sides, of Pluto and Aquarius, whether it's we get inklings of it through artificial intelligence or augmented reality. We certainly have it, as Saturn went into Aquarius 30 years ago, and we had the internet begin to happen with, with first Saturn and Uranus and Neptune all moving through Aquarius. Now we have Pluto into Aquarius, and I mean, almost like clockwork, within a few days of Pluto moving into Aquarius, the announcement was made that Elon Musk's company has successfully implanted a microchip into someone's brain that allows them to communicate with an external device so that they're able to give it commands, a paralyzed person. Now, is this good or bad? I'm not judging. I'm just saying that technology without wisdom, technology is not science. Technology by itself is the shadow side of Aquarius and or even Pluto in Aquarius. And are we willing to, become Borg or termites? And as much as my politics are very different, well, first of all, they're different than anyone might think, regardless of how they have me pegged. But my politics are certainly, I when I look at in the United States, MAGA, Donald Trump and its movement. To me, this is Freud 101. One of the things, and I know Freud is considered to be, so politically, incorrect on so many levels, but we forget the fact that we would have no depth psychology if he did not do what he did, if he did not discover and map the beginnings of what became a much larger map of the unconscious than he ever really understood. But where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought. Oh, that happens occasionally. Thank you. That one of the things that Freud, I mean, aside from words like unconscious and resistance and projection and transference and all these words that are used to describe what everyone and anyone goes through as they grow, whether they're in therapy or in a relationship, whether it's a Freudian reality or not, the words are words that he coined to map this out. Now, one of the things that Freud came up with is this concept that he called infantile regression. And infantile regression is something that happens to all of us when shit gets bad. When we get into situations that are overwhelming, we go to a place automatically that was in the past that was safer. And ultimately, archetypally, back to the mother's breast, back to being held, theoretically, if we were lucky enough to be held as a youth. But this is what infantile regression is this thing of going back in time to when things were better, when things are not good now. When I'm afraid, I go back to a time when, and my behavior goes back to a time when things were better. The problem is things weren't necessarily better. We just remember them as better. And this whole idea of make America great again, MAGA, is to me a projection of this fear. And I'm not saying that the fear is an incorrect feeling. Feelings can't be incorrect, but there's a process rather than just going into denial and saying, let's go back to the 1950s or the 1700s when everything was great, when all you had to do was to be white and own land and you were in charge of your world. Cool, let's do that. Let's make America great again. When the fact of the matter is that it wasn't so great. It was great for some people, but not great for others. And so all I'm saying here is that when we see the unknown and we see the potential of the shadow of what some people call post-humanism or transhumanism, or this artificial intelligence, AI, or augmented reality, AR, or all these things that are going to make humans no longer humans as we know them. Well, I got some news for you. The humans that we are today are unrecognizable to our ancestors just 200 years ago, 150 years ago. And yes, this trajectory will continue, but it's not going to be stopped by people basically just having fear and saying, I'm not going. We're back to the caterpillar saying, hell no, I won't go into that cocoon, because even though butterflies look cool, I don't want to end my world as a caterpillar, because that's all I have. That's all I know. That's what I am. And I think that's part of what Pluto in Aquarius is going to confront us with. And I think Pluto in Aquarius is really just part of a much larger. Um, I don't know that there's ever been a time where all the outer planets shift signs so quickly. We have Pluto moving into Aquarius. That's largely occurred, won't be completed until next year. But Pluto into Aquarius. We have Neptune moving at the very end of Pisces, Neptune moving into Aries. We have Uranus now toward the end of Taurus, and it will be moving into Gemini in a couple of years. We have Saturn moving through Pisces. Now, Saturn changes signs every couple of years, but when it changes signs and moves into Aries, it's going to be doing it with Neptune. So Neptune and Saturn will be moving into Aries while they're conjoining at the same time. And so we basically have Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all changing signs, and the dynamic of what's going to happen between now and 2027 is I don't think anyone can imagine it. And I happen to be one of those people who imagines the future, and I can't imagine it either.
I was about to ask you, how do you imagine the future? Because it's intuitively, but yeah, I think definitely nobody knows
Well,
exactly.
I do think that there's a couple of givens. One is that it doesn't matter how fast we think things have been moving and how fast things are moving now. We ain't seen nothing. It's that graph of what are they of a hyperbolic function, where you have something going across, and rather than just going up, it goes across and then it curves and it goes just like straight up off the map. And we're at that point. We're at the point that some philosophers have called the end of history, because everything that's ever happened is happening now. It's like in some ways, revelations is actually occurring. I mean, you can go on to your electromagnetic frequency dials, whether it's in YouTube or Netflix or this and that, and you can dial yourself into any reality, anytime, any place in the past, present, or future, and it comes alive. It's like Benjamin Franklin is alive. Charlemagne is alive. They're all basically living in this moment through the reoccurrence of their electromagnetic energy. So I think that one thing, though, is two things are for sure. One is that things are going to continue speeding up in ways that we can't imagine. Look, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, no one could have imagined, an iPhone, or, a computer in your hand. In fact, that computer in your hand 75 years ago would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars and taken up 3 warehouses and still not have been able to do what your cell phone can do today. And so I don't think there's a way that we get to see what's around the bend technologically. That's number one. Number two is we don't have any way of incorporating what can and will happen sooner or later, and I think it's sooner than later, as we are confronted by a newer understanding of time that may have to do with confrontation with extraterrestrial, with alien intelligence, with intelligence that is not of this planet. It's inevitable. I mean, it's just our sensorial grip is moving too fast outward for that not to occur. And that obviously is, if you're paying attention, it's already occurring. It just has not been absorbed. And then three, by the end of this decade, really beginning in 2025, 26, really 26, 27, 28, there's going to be a balance of outer planet energy that we have not seen in our lifetimes or in recent history. Because what we are experiencing is largely a result of what happened back in the 60s when Uranus and Pluto aligned. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, when Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune aligned. And then in the 2010s, 2012 to 2015-ish, when Uranus and Pluto were square, and everything back from the 1960s was all of a sudden back on our plate socially, culturally. It was sex, drugs, rock and roll, gender equality, demonstrations in the streets, use of drugs, legalization, of recreational drugs, legalization of gay marriage, civil rights, all of these things during that square. The conflict was back. Now, in 2027, 28, 26, 27, and 28, Uranus is going to be making a trine to Pluto. It won't be a Uranus-Pluto conjunction like it was in the 60s. It won't be a Uranus-Pluto square like it was through the 20aughts and 2010s, but they're going to be trine. And this is going to be a balance between that underworld, the bacchanalian expression of everything that was unconscious, that exploded into awareness in the 60s, Uranus shining the light, the lightning striking, and bringing all that stuff out into the open, and or the conflict that occurred in the 2010s, but now they're going to be working together. Now, many astrologers say, oh, this is great, the battle's been won, things are going to be awesome. We don't know. We just know that the conflict won't be there as much. And again, I go back to Borg or being a termite. What happens if this shuts down through what appears to be a large planetary global movement of a re-energization, a re-energizing of global mass fascism? What happens if by 2027, 28, everything is absolutely flowing like this because all of the excitement of the opening has been shut down? Now, I'm not saying that will happen. I'm saying that there's a quantum indeterminacy that is requiring each and every one of us to show up however we can, because what happens out there is basically a manifestation of what happens in here. I end just about every podcast and every YouTube that I do with this: think cosmically, act locally. The saying is think globally, act locally. But that's not enough. We have to push out as far as we can. But it does no good at all to think about visionary stuff, to run rampant in the imagination, to use astrology, to use whatever sort of neurohacking, whether it's cold plunges or dietary supplementation or pranayama or entheogenic substances, whatever it is you're using to go out there. It's no use at all to think cosmically unless you're taking care of stuff at home, unless we clean up the wars in Palestine and Gaza by cleaning up our relationship with our exes, or our kids or our parents. That's the sad truth and the difficult truth of it, because many of us want to just go fix what's out there. We become political activists. and yet we don't live that on a personal level. And I'm not saying one is more. I'm not saying that political activism is not important. I'm just saying that that it requires work at both ends of the spectrum.
I agree with you. And it goes back to what we were talking about, projection. And if you were talking about MAGA, Make America Great Again, I mean, is that once again, are we saying that America is broken? So then it goes back to what we're talking. Are we projecting that we're trying to fix things? And so we're looking externally to try to repair things when really we need to work within. Because I always say we are of light, love, and truth. And if we can activate those within ourselves, that is where the change really starts happening around us. And I really believe it does start with us. I'm practicing, and I'm saying practicing because I've been practicing for a while and I'm still not haven't perfected it, but non-resistance, non-attachment, and non-judgment, because we've been conditioned to do all of those.
Oh, sure. Sure.
And that's really hard in itself, but just a little practice, I'm starting to see some little changes around me because I'm not allowing myself to buy into the narratives. I'm not resisting them. I'm just allowing them, accepting what is for what it is, without judgment, without my projection. But like I said, it's a practice. Now I am also
and it's a practice. There's a wonderful saying, and I've done work on trying to find out where this quote comes from, and there's a few different conflicting stories. It's not mine, but it goes like this: in theory, theory and practice are the same. In theory, theory and practice are the same, but in practice they are not. And and many of us live our lives in practicing the theory. But, there are times when judgment is absolutely important and required for survival. There are times when you don't just allow something to happen and say, nope, not my circus, not my monkeys, whatever. There are times to engage. And yet still, I think the real practice is engaging, understanding that we are all part of this incredible game, and that we may or may not impact the outcome the way that we think it should be. But like you look at things like plastic pollution. I mean, I'm certainly an avowed environmentalist. I as a moderner, I'm sure that I pollute more than I would care to, and yet I go out of my way to recycle. I minimize use of plastics. I pick up trash, when I see it. But the plastic island, in the Pacific Ocean, or the microplastics that are now in all of our food or water. The environmentalists tell us this is the most horrific thing ever. This is like really sad. And I'm not saying that's untrue, but I am saying that from a larger perspective, we don't have a damn clue, because we don't know that nature, which has the ultimate wisdom, we can't create. We say, oh, that's man-made. No, if it's made by humans, it's not any less natural than a beehive, which is made by bees. Is honey natural? Well, we say that it's natural, but somehow then we say, well, when we make this, it's not natural because, machines are not natural because we made them. Well, you can say that, but bees make honey and bees keep the flowers alive like we keep the machines going. My point here is that we don't know, but it's possible that the 10, 20, 30,000 year evolutionary process is to actually replace carbon with some sort of long chain polymers that will allow us to live for hundreds or thousands of years, because it's the carbon iron degradation that occurs. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I read my share of science fiction, and we forget that what was written in science fiction in the 17, 1800s, and even in the early 1900s is basically where we live. Jules Verne, wrote about flying machines and submarines that didn't even exist. And one of the things, if I didn't have to make a living being an astrologer, I would just write poetry. Definitely a wordsmith, and I study poetry. I read and write and recite poetry. But one of the quatrain or couplets, a two-line poem that I wrote some 50 years ago, I think holds better ground today than it did even when I wrote it. And it goes like this: science fiction has become science faction, but look at the robots, they have no reaction. We don't know. We don't know. When Isaac Asimov wrote I, Robot in the early 1950s and came up with the 3 laws of robotics, he had no idea that actually we now are manufacturing robots that actually are programmed to contain those 3 laws of robotics. That Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, came up with this idea that if we launched satellites, he wrote a science fiction book about launching satellites and having them be in a place where they moved around the Earth at the same rate the Earth was spinning. Those became geosynchronous satellites, which are all the communication satellites, which are stationary over points, are based upon the science fiction writer's idea. And in fact, taking that a step further, Arthur C. Clarke wrote a book about space elevators, which I'm sure will occur as we develop the technology with materials that have enough tensile strength. It's what happens if you take one of these geosynchronous satellites that's always above the same spot, that's orbiting 125 miles above the Earth. And what happens if you build a tube of flexible but tensilely strong material that goes all the way down to Earth, and you put an elevator in it? Now you have an ability to go up into orbit by just taking an elevator. All I'm saying is that when we look at Pluto moving into Aquarius, who knows what the next invention around the corner is? Because until Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, no one ever thought it was impossible, or that it would be possible to transmit your voice. Wireless communication, even though electromagnetic radiation was discovered in the 1800s, and people like James Clerk Maxwell wrote equations to figure out how these electromagnetic waves travel and the speed at which they travel, and so on. No one ever could have imagined that we could take reality and package it up into discrete packages, and then somehow throw it into a sensor device and then accelerate it at the speed of light and end up with you and I talking on opposite sides of the planet that are basically creating a reality built upon this electromagnetic universe. That who could have imagined that? And who can imagine what black holes or wormholes might be as we move through space and time? We don't have any way of understanding it because we're not there yet. And of course, one of the great myths that I think will fall as Pluto moves through Aquarius is this myth that we've evolved for millions of years, and here we are. This is it. We've arrived. Yeah, we're just another moving point on this process of evolution.
I now I'm in awe of you. Can I just say, Rick? And I now know why everyone speaks so highly of you. You are a wealth of knowledge. I love your mind, the way that you think. And by the way, when I talk about judgment, I agree with what you're saying. I think for me, when I practice non-judgment, it's just I feel that sometimes when we judge others or we judge situations, we're blinding ourselves from truly seeing what's in front. So
Oh,
we have
and I wasn't
to,
saying that I
no,
wasn't
but I
judging.
agree with
I
what you're
wasn't
saying.
thinking that that you didn't do
Yeah.
that. I just wanted to be clear because a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, no, and I love the way that you explain that because it's true. There are sometimes you are going to have to make a judgment call, and there are sometimes you are have to get involved and so forth. So I do agree, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective on that. So thank you, Rick. I am conscious of your time. I'm going to have to get you back on the show because I just love listening to you. I'm just like on such a high.
I'd be happy to. I can't wait to do it in person sometime, but
Yes.
I'd be happy to do it. This is as in person as we get to do. And I need to go back and finish editing my February forecast, which I will have posted on YouTube by February 1st, which is my look at the month ahead. And then also on Friday night, February 2nd, I do a live event every month at a local coffee house called Astrology Night, and at 6:30 p.m., however that uh, is in Australia, 18 hours ahead, whatever it is. um, that'll be done live stream on my YouTube channel, and it'll also be available. But I'll be doing basically a look at the upcoming year, 2024, and that will be available on my YouTube channel, which I know will be linked from
Oh,
what
100%.
you're posting.
Link,
Yeah.
we'll link everything, and I'm going to absolutely check that out myself. So thank you. So the way that we wrap the show up, we always love to ask our guests to leave 3 shiny golden nuggets for our audience. What would be those 3 shiny golden nuggets or 3 tips or practical exercises that you would like to leave for them? It could be even like how we're going to navigate through this wonderful these conjunctions that are about to present themselves to us.
Okay. So what I wrote is not what I'm going to say because you asked me to think about this in advance. But uh, the first nugget is ignorance is not bliss. It's just ignorance. And which leads us to golden nugget 2, which is the way in which we can change the trajectory of our individual or collective lives, individual life or collective lives, is by constantly and always looking at ways in which we convert our ignorance, because we're all ignorant about some things always, by looking at how we can convert our ignorance into knowledge. Because the way we change our trajectory is by increasing our awareness. That's the only thing that we can change. We talked about that earlier. And this is really the primary use of astrology. Is it's very at most fundamental levels, it's a tool by which we can increase our awareness. We can make what was invisible visible. And that is nugget 2. Ignorance is not bliss, and we can counteract ignorance by increasing our awareness, which then leads to golden nugget 3, that the more aware we are, the more choices that we have. This improves our ability at any given moment to either handle changes that are out of our control or to manage changes that are within our control. And there is a difference. I mean, there are things, the Greeks would call this fate harmony. That's the fate of which we can't change. We're back to gravity, boom, you drop something, it's going to land. Your phone will hit the road or the tile and it'll shatter. But there are things that we can do, that we can learn, that can change. We can put a protector around our cell phone. We can be extra cautious when it comes to getting it out of our pocket and so on. So the third thing is learning and exploring ways in which we get to handle or manage change, which is basically something that we all share.
I love all three of them, Rick. Thank you so much. So, and we'll have all the links in the show notes. Where do you hang out the most? Do you hang out? Is it YouTube, Instagram? Where do you hang out the most?
In the three-dimensional world is where I like to hang out the most. No, I am on Instagram regularly. Most of my major communication, my monthly, which is which goes out to typically 50 to 100,000 people a month watch my monthly, which is the cosmic weather for the month ahead. It's a deep dive. It's not for the casual. I'm not interested in making that number 1 million or 5 million, because the people who watch it are people who are really, getting out of it what they need to. I'm not just interested I've done the popular thing, for 20 and a half years. I wrote a daily horoscope column that had 10 to 20 million readers a day, every day. I mean, if you read your horoscope column online from 2001 to 2021-ish, that was my horoscope column. I mean, it was the horoscope column on AOL, MySpace, Google, Yahoo, Huffington Post, LA Times. I mean, it was all over the place. I don't do that anymore. I'm more interested in working with my apprentices, working with narrower people through platforms like the Astrology Hub, and through YouTube, and by subscribing, and being notified, you'll be kept appraised there. That usually links to other stuff. You can also get on my mailing list, which is through my website, Rick Levine Astrologer, which is really just a collector for my mailing list. I will never overwhelm anyone with a lot of bullshit. I hate getting mail from people every day that I don't know. It's
Yeah.
the quickest way to have me get off your mailing list is by you sending me stuff that just becomes dribble.
I'm the same, exactly the same. And I love the fact it's not about quantity, it's about quality, right? So I think, even for us, we've just started YouTube and it's like, well, how many downloads? It's like we don't even look at that. For us, it's about providing good content, connecting people with other people. That's it. It's about collaboration. Yeah. I want
Yeah,
to
but
say,
I'm not on Facebook as much as I used to be. I still post to Instagram, but where I hang out the most is in the three-dimensional world.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So I will have all those in the show notes. Rick, I want to say thank you so much for your time, your energy, your wealth of wisdom. I just love what you do. I love listening to you. I could sit here all day listening to you.
Well,
So
let's do
definitely
that
get you back
someday.
on.
You're
Yeah.
you're a lovely interviewer. It's been a pleasure. I do enough interviews where some are just like pulling teeth and they're a pain. This is just like it's like Amanda. I mean, Amanda may be my favorite interviewer because we just get on and we just hang,
Yeah, I
and she's
love
just
Amanda.
brilliant at always knowing what to say and how to bring out of me, or how to condense what
Mm.
I've rambled on for 5 or 10 minutes, and she puts it in a sentence and asks a question. I go, how'd you do that? I can't do that.
Yeah,
So,
she's
yeah.
wonderful. I
So
love
thank
her.
you. Thank you for
Thank you.
inviting me.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.